So we are really lucky today to have Matthew Wysocki with us. He is an associate professor at Flagler College, where he is the coordinator of media studies. His research interests frequently focus on textual analysis of video games, professional wrestling, and neo-noir. Specifically in video games, he is interested in the nature of control and the roles that players create as producers of their own vehicles of consumption. He is the co-editor of Rated M for Mature, Sex and Sexuality in Video Games, and editor of Control Alt Play, Essays on Control in Video Games. He is the co-chair for the Game Studies area of Popular Culture Association / American Culture Association and president of the Popular Culture / American Culture Association in the South. Awesome. If you're all good to go, Matthew, please take it away.
Thank you very much. My pronouns he is. Let's start with the obvious. It's a tremendous honor that Multiplay Network asked me to deliver the keynote for this conference on sex and romance in video games. What may not be so obvious here at the start, but will probably be obvious by the end, is that I have never been asked to deliver a keynote before. So if I do it wrong, it's entirely due to inexperience, and this is what you get. I do also apologize for anyone. I do speak vernacular American English, so if I use words or anything like that that you are unfamiliar with, put it in the chat so that I can translate, hopefully. I never imagined when I started making choices as a younger academic that one of the things that I would end up being recognized for was being an expert on sex and romance. If I'm being honest, when I first started doing any sort of research in these areas, I was inspired a little bit because, well, if I'm being blunt, it was funny. And to see how people would react. Oh, you're a professor, what do you study? Porn. And probably not the best reason, but who can say where inspiration comes from? I mean, I knew it also had value to study, but what really helped clarify its importance is what happened at one of the first conferences where I actually presented any sort of research in any of these areas. It was a presentation on porn and parody, and I had clips that I was showing. So, of course, I warned the audience that they would include adult content, and I would be using adult language so that no one would have to witness or hear anything that they would not be comfortable hearing or seeing. About a minute in, before we had gotten even to the first clip, an audience member walked out. I thought it was odd that they had waited for me to get started, but I continued in my presentation. But after about another minute, they returned with two friends. And also recall that this person asked a few questions during the question and answer period. So they were, after the presentation, a friend and I got takeout and brought it back to the lobby to eat, and that's a whole separate adventure. They walked by with, the young scholar walked by with another person, and the one who asked the questions got all excited saying, "That's him, he was the one I was telling you about." They asked some more questions, they asked for pictures. I felt like a rock star, very good for my ego. Then the fourth person who was with them that wasn't in the presentation told me that she was from the local community college. The three others were undergrads and first-generation students, and the school had a low graduation rate, and anything that helped a student get excited increased the chances they'd stay and finish. She brought the students hoping they'd be inspired, and one was amazed that academics were allowed to study things like pornography. Understandably, this blew me away. But it helped hammer home in another way why studying this is important. It's not just that it helps give us insight into our various cultures, or that sex and romance are important, so studying them is inherently important, but also that we're allowed to. I get to study sex in video games, and no one has stopped me yet from doing so. It's pretty cool. But it is a privilege. We're allowed to, like I said. Because even in 2022, we have colleagues and friends who are restricted from doing so, either by administrators, department chairs, faculty advisors, fear of an unknown job market. And just in case you are hearing this and have had no such concerns, be aware that not everyone has the freedoms that we have had. Sorry. Sex and play have long-standing connections. I owe my co-editor, Evan Lotteria, for bringing this to my attention, but people who refuse to get serious about a relationship may be accused of playing games. Baseball metaphors are used to describe varying levels of sexual intimacy as bases, and the euphemisms pitching, catching, switch hitting, playing for the other team denote sexual positions and romantic partner choices. Successfully having intercourse with another person gets referred to as scoring. Masturbation and autoerotic arousal, often referred to as playing with oneself. I could go on, but I believe the point has been illustrated. Video games, not surprisingly, also have long-standing connections to sex and pornography. I have only 20 minutes, so I cannot go through a thorough review. But for example, earlier writings from Brathwaite, Consalvo, and Zimmerman point out how, quoting Zimmerman, mainstream AAA video games operate on principles akin to porn, highly repetitive activities premised on visceral pleasure and spectacle. Much like porn, the majority of the more mainstream fare has tended to support more heteronormative and proper ideas about sex and sexuality. But also, much like porn, increases in creators, developers, and distribution channels have allowed alternative and independent creators to find audiences with a greater range of inclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer representation and same-sex romance and gender variant play mechanics. To some degree, this has trickled up into more options and representation in bigger studio offerings, while also experiencing, as many of us here have sadly also experienced firsthand, some horrific pushback from audiences seeking to gatekeep games. So from that, I'd like to walk through some of the research I've done on sex and romance in video games over the years and discuss what I've learned through my own work. To preview, basically, there are people who really want it in their games. And what we've gotten so far, at least from bigger studios, bigger budget games, is limited at best. My first project where I combined looking at video games with looking at sexual content looked at modding sexual content into games. It would eventually become my chapter in Rated M for Mature. Get that plug-in if you don't have it yet. I edited this with Evan Lotteria, and it's available from Bloomsbury Publishing, so throw that out there. Most of this audience, I'm guessing, is familiar with the concept of game mods, but just in case some people who have joined in are not, there exists an interactive audience of video game players that create codes known as mods that allow the user to alter the game in a variety of ways, including changing the appearance of characters, adding levels, or adding cheats. Gamers then share these codes with other gamers, allowing them to expand the capabilities of the games beyond their original state. While much of this modding is done to increase the play aspects of gaming, some individuals instead code in content of a more adult nature, including nude codes and animated sexual encounters. Now, let me just start by saying, when you do this type of research, beware of looking into the abyss, because the abyss also looks into you. I have seen things with some of these mods, and if you have seen the images I shared in my chapter, those are the acceptable tamer ones, if you have seen that. The most notorious mod, arguably, is the hot coffee mod, and few things have illustrated the speed with which digital content ages than how this example changed from current events to urban legend to potentially unknown story for some of your undergraduates. When I talk about it now with my classes, I feel like a grizzled prospector inviting kids to gather around the fire while I tell them a tall tale from ancient times in video games, and it's not really that old. It's 2015, I think. For the uninitiated, hot coffee was fossilized content discovered by players in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. That fossilized content is code which, during the development process, has become redundant, but it's more convenient to leave it in rather than remove it. Simply speaking, the developer decides that it would be cheaper to spackle over than edit it out and make sure the code is clean. In that game, the main character was capable of dating various NPC women. That was a left in the game. And successful dates allowed him to invite these women inside for coffee. This interaction was only heard and not seen. You heard what happened when you were getting coffee inside with the NPC. The rewards for achieving this were benefits like extra vehicles or not losing weapons when hospitalized. One of the girlfriends turned out to be a nurse, so that ended up being a benefit. The hot coffee mod replaces this with a mini game that allows the player to enter the girlfriend's bedroom and see this all and control the character's actions during a sex scene, basically. So we have an example of in a AAA game of developers including active sexual content dating back to 2004, till the decision was made to seriously tone it down to implied rather than explicit. So previous to the game coming out, they made the decision to tone this down. We also have evidence of players sharing the mode, coding allowing access to this till the negative publicity caused Rockstar to patch it out and remove the legacy code from all future releases. And they released a patch that basically, if you had an older version of the game that still had this legacy code, if you didn't download the patch, which would remove it from your access to it, then your game would suffer, its performance would suffer as a result. Now, as I said, the other thing, one of the other popular activities that players have is to create nude mods. At the time I was doing this research, a site that turned out to be very valuable for collecting images was nudepatch.net, which was a clearinghouse for nude skin mods. From the site at the time, I came across this tremendous description of their goals. This is a little bit long of a quote, I apologize for that. And please realize that the grammatical errors are theirs, not mine. I was never able to determine if this was a situation of English as a second language or just poor editing or just poor grammar skills, period. So here we go. With the advent of computer games, new art named briefly as a nude patch was born. To change textures and skins of heroes of game, transforming the boring dressed heroines into naked beauties. To change registration wallpaper in game for a pornographic skin, or to think out new erotic clothes for the characters. I think each player, at least time in the life, dreamt to play nude Blood Rain, to see naked Alex from Half-Life, to run about on forgotten vaults in search of ancient treasures, playing for exposed Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. All it became possible thanks to naked patches on nudepatch.net. This site is the largest base of naked patches in the world. We have collected the best patches for the most popular computer games, which you can quickly download from our site. In the list, our popular nude mods are such monsters of the computer game industry as Sims 3. For downloading modes, you also are accessible to little-known games such as Silent Hill, Vampire the Masquerade, Bloodlines, Singles, and thousands others. Are selected creations of the best artists of nude patches. You can add the patch if something has been passed. The sheer volume of games that they created patches for, but the one line in there that each player, at least in time, has dreamt of playing nude characters. I don't know necessarily that I agree with each player, but enough that this site ran for quite a while. Not surprisingly, Skyrim, Fallout were some of the more popular. World of Warcraft, and obviously Lara Croft. Here's another user who talked about a patch that they made for Skyrim. And this one was impressive because it wasn't enough for them to just create a nude patch, but also to allow in Skyrim you have an actual modded sex scene. Basically, this is Benjamin Metalmaster quoting him. Basically, what I have here is to be the only uncensored and original form of the sex mod in Skyrim. I think censorship is wrong and sick on all levels. The 5 mods which have created this mini sex game are Behavior Patcher, Nude Males, Nude Females, Animated Prostitution, and Girls of Skyrim. I shall now leave the introduction and show you the video. Watch it before it's banned by the C word who censor shit. It consisted of a Khajiit who was able to pay a NPC merchant to, and I quote, "fuck you." Using additional dialogue options led to both parties deciding right there in the market in front of everyone else was the perfect place for an intimate encounter. But this level of dedication of work to figure out which mods to put together to be able to achieve this spoke to, again, the desire for some gamers to have this kind of content in their AAA games. It reinforces that there is a level of desire for adult content in games that are not built around pornographic or sexual themes. But this content is not given the same level of attention by game developers as, say, an amazingly rendered exploding skull, primarily due to concerns for limiting the audience that would be interested or able to purchase such games. Ultimately, this leaves the interactive audience of modders to explore and create this level of content instead. Browsing sexual mod clearinghouse sites, it quickly becomes obvious that a vast amount of content being created by modders is of female nude skins, whether human or not. The vast majority of it reinforces a male gaze and would prove quite easy to argue a heteronormative reading of this type of content, especially since most nude patches in essence merely overlay a visual element with no actual in-play benefits, literally creating content that exists for its to be looked at in this state. And most of what is to be looked at is naked female bodies. But also this is revealing the traditional stereotypical gender portrayals of many video game characters. It ultimately, it looks like sex if it were designed by someone who's not actually had it yet and mainly knows about it through pornography. But for these modders and the players who download their work, sexual modifications are what they have chosen to focus their efforts and their playboard on. This is desire for content of a more adult, mature nature. The nude skins and sex simulations created by the modding community speak to the want for games to be mature in ways that go beyond realistic violence. These are activities that go beyond the current confines of large-budget digital gameplay. There is little desire for... Sorry, stop that. Little desire from the game manufacturers. I am having some problems with my mouse. I apologize. It is not wanting to scroll a tiny bit. Oh, goodness. The wonders of technology. Sorry, revealing the traditional stereotypical gender portrayals of many video game characters. Sorry, I already did that. I am apologizing. You can edit this out later when we do this live. Okay, so Mass Effect sex simulations will never become the next Counter-Strike, and Blizzard Entertainment is not going to add Dark Elf nude skins in their next update of World of Warcraft. And for most, if not all games, modding content of a sexual nature is in clear violation somewhere in their end-using license agreements, making this content perhaps not revolutionary, but rebellious. At the time I first wrestled with these ideas, I pointed out that sexual content still remains a taboo that mainstream developers seem hesitant to explore beyond certain levels. So mods of this nature are a space of resistance for the player looking for sex play in their gameplay. And why do they feel the need to create this content? Because for the most part, game producers have been slow to include anything of this nature. Currently, I'm working on a project exploring how far one AAA game has come in their ability to add content that might titillate players or have emotional impact on both player and their avatars. So currently I'm working on Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the most recent addition in the long-running series. I might get through this a little quicker just looking at the time. The player inhabits the world of Viking warrior Eivor, and at numerous times they are given the option to pursue relationships, both physical and emotional. But outside of minor partial influence on one potential storyline outcome, the romances pursued ultimately lead to little more than dialogue flavor. Be aware that what follows includes spoilers for AC Valhalla. Some of the analysis is contingent on the choices I made in my gameplay. This is a game from November of 2020, so if you haven't played it yet, you have to add time. And also, I love the Assassin's Creed series. I've played all the major releases and some of the peripheral ones. I've 100%ed Black Flag. I have strong feelings on which protagonist is the best. It's Cassandra. I have even finished the story in Rogue, the worst game in the series. I'm biased. Important to get that out of the way. Valhalla is only the second game in the entire Assassin's Creed series, following Odyssey, to incorporate romance options into it. Any romance in earlier games was strictly confined to cutscenes. So romance is, comparably speaking, still new to the series, at least playable romance. Additionally, in Valhalla, the player can choose their Eivor to present as either male or female. There are even the options to allow the computer to switch between the two for story-related reasons, or to even go in and change it yourself if you desire. There is a gender presentation that the game considers canon, and an explanation for why Eivor switches between the two presentations, but that's a level of spoiler I'm not going to go into right now. Syndicated also is excellent, by the way, and Ava Frey is one of my favorite protagonists. What these gender presentations mean with relation to the various romance options is that all of them are available to the player regardless of what the player or game prefers. None are coded to favor any gender. This is arguably the most positive aspect of dating in 9th century Europe. There are 11 separate characters available in the base game to pursue a romance, 5 coded female, 6 coded male. There's also 1 male coded character that you can flirt with till you learn that their heart belongs to another and they're just flirting with you. Additionally, each of the first 2 DLCs have a single romance option, one of each gender presentation. The one from Wrath of the Druids, if you played, DLC was designed in a lab to tick off all the romance fetish boxes for certain types of nerds. If you've played this, you already know what I'm talking about. Redhead, Irish, poet, singer, she's saucy. Now, once more, the lack of gender restrictions on romance partners is the most positive element. Now, let's some of the less positive. How are we doing? Okay. The vast majority of romance options, the difficulty is non-existent. They flirt. You're given a dialogue option with a heart. Choose that, romance happens. Some of them you have to flirt twice on different occasions. 3 of them require that you go on a side quest that also functions as a sort of date before you unlock the romance dialogue. Now, this is not a dating sim or an RPG. It is an action game. But without some level of chance, the romances have an almost foregone nature. Everyone wants Eivor. The question is, does Eivor want them back? Because except for the one character, she can have them. Now, if you enjoy a level of challenge in your romance, this does not have them. Also, each intimate encounter follows pretty much the same steps. Eivor and whoever decide they will consummate the encounter, brief cutscene of physical interaction, fade to black. This is not an argument in favor of program animated pornography, but for a game that is already rated in the United States as M for mature, this because of partial nudity and sexual themes. If you're desiring more sex in your sexual themes, this is pretty tame for M for mature. Far from. The main concern is that outside of a single exception, there are no consequences for the player's choices regarding who they agree to romance. It is almost entirely consequence-free in all that implies. Most of them end up being limited to one-night stands. A few of the characters are never seen again after their night of passion. A couple is remember the encounter fondly, but do not pursue it. Only 3 require you to go on a date with them that I've been able to, and only 1 of them gets upset if you decide to date other people. In fact, one of them I forgot to break up with, and they were not upset at all. And once you actually are dating them, all you really get is the option to kiss them or have the same coded sexual encounter, which all the same cutscene every time. Repeat as often as you would like, and then no more consequences on the story. The one story consequence can be mitigated by what you do in other encounters. The character who would be upset by you romancing this particular person will be less upset if you do lots of other things and decide to get over it. One other small complaint that is more personal, one of the characters flirts with you by letting you know that they can, this is the euphemism they use, show you how to wield their plow sword. And maybe the writers really did their homework, and this was a phrase Vikings used. I don't know. I don't want to know. I know myself and my Eivor were not successfully seduced by this phrase. Now, I recognize that it's only with Odyssey and Valhalla that the AC series has really been incorporating choice and consequence in any real way. And even then, these have been minor story flavors in ways that would not alter the canonical threads of the backbone story. In all likelihood, the writers desired to ensure the same story got told regardless of whether a player pursued all of the romance available or preferred to opt out of all of them. But for any gamers desiring the opportunity to have some self-directed romance in their adventure, it remains superficial, a tacked-on inclusion that proves to have little more consequence than picking an armor skin. Which again speaks to, if players want it, mods may be the only way they're going to get it in the near future. One final thought I want to leave with you all, if they'll still think it's a little bit funny that I study sex and porn and romance, but then again, sex and porn and romance are funny sometimes too. Thank you all.